on that particular story, joined now in studio by leader of ATM, Vuyo Zungula. Good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. Quick perusal of the Electoral Act would say that after the president would have declared the election day, the timetable is set up in consultation with political parties. So I would have thought this would have been something that would have been canvassed with you before it was announced.
On Friday, there was a meeting with the IC with political parties. Obviously, when political parties go there, it is the representative of political parties, and they are not furnished with the timetable so that when they go to the meeting, they go with the mandate of the political party to raise some issues. They went to the meeting, and the timetable was unpacked to these representatives. These representatives then went back to their parties to say, this is what IEC had presented. Now, our party said, look, there is a short turnaround time when it comes to the submission of lists. Remember that this meeting was sitting on Friday. Next Friday, which is the 8th of March, that is when the list submissions need to be submitted. Now, our view is that when it comes to some of the parties, there is not enough time, or that time is too short for parties to consult with their stakeholders, their members. And some parties actually have list conferences to ensure that there's a democratic process. Yeah. Now, to have a short turnaround time, it then impacts now the party's ability to have democratic processes for them to comply with that March 8 deadline.
Yeah. But one would say that's not a problem for the ATM. You're not a new party.
Yes.
You've been at this, you've done this a couple of times, and you've been at local government and everywhere else.
Yeah. No, the ATM is ready. Yeah. However, our view as the ATM is that we want free and fair elections. Therefore, even if something does not affect us, but the fact that other players in the space are negatively affected, we need to outline that this is wrong and needs to be changed. So we are not only advocating for issues because we are affected personally as an organization. We are raising issues that other political parties have been raising. You'll remember that in 2019, the announcement on the date of the elections was done on the 26th of Feb, and the submission was on the 13th of March because the elections were going to be on the 8th of May. Now, if you look at these current elections, they are going to be held on the 29th of May, meaning there's an additional 3 weeks, which in our view, the IEC should have taken the burden on themselves in terms of dealing with the complexities and not take the burden or the hardships of wanting to speed up the process to political parties. Because the IEC has got infrastructure, has been managing elections, and they've been given additional resources. So our view is that the IEC should utilize the 3 weeks, additional 3 weeks that has been availed, and at the same time with the additional resources, they are more than capable to actually deal with the complexities instead of taking all of those responsibilities to the political parties.
Yeah. Once again, why would you choose to amplify the voice of new parties? They are more than well capable of doing that themselves.
Look, that is what those parties that were in attendance in the meeting raised. These parties in the meeting, what they raised is that we want free and fair elections. Therefore, if there's any part of the process that is seemingly unfair towards either a new political party or an old political party, we need to speak in one voice and not have a posture that says, if we as party A are not affected, therefore are going to keep quiet because we're not affected. We should denounce any unfairness, regardless whether only a few parties are affected. So it is in that spirit we, as an organization, we form part of that meeting. And it is that spirit, as that collective of political parties, that we said, let us raise issues whereby there is unfairness or maybe some processes are unjust, not because you as an individual party are affected, but if the system would create a position or a situation whereby the elections in some regard would not be regarded as free or fair by some people, we need to equally voice those concerns out.
But what if the inability to meet the deadline is purely based on ill-preparedness of the parties, not because of the unfairness of the IEC processes?
Look, when it comes to the parties, if you were to look at the parties, new parties that are contesting for the first time, they need to submit signatures. And when they have to submit signatures, it is them that need to physically capture these signatures, not the IEC. So if you look at the requirements that are there on these parties, new parties, they might find it difficult to deal with a lot of this work that they need to do. So it is not because they are ill-prepared. It's just a matter of there's a short turnaround time and there's additional requirements that were not there in the previous elections. So our view then as these parties is to say, yes, there's additional requirements because our democracy is maturing. There's going to be independent candidates. However, that must not come as shortening the time frames for political parties. The IEC must devise mechanisms with the additional resources and the institutional memory to actually deal with these complexities instead of now throwing all of the responsibilities to political parties, and then political parties are disadvantaged in the process.
Yeah. So if we were to, for example, I know you're not necessarily involved in that particular matter. It's a matter that was brought by the Rivonia Circle trying to get access to the Constitutional Court. But the Constitutional Court would have said these amendments have been in place, for example, since June last year. And therefore, parties would have known since June last year that at least on estimation, this particular administration's tenure expires at a particular date. In fact, most of you were calling for the president to announce the date because you know when his term expires and when about the elections should have been in place. And so all these things of party lists, party conferences, and so on and so forth should have been put inside that framework.
There were court processes. Even now, I think there are other court processes to challenge those some of these requirements. Even with the Constitutional Court case, it was dismissed on an urgent basis, meaning it's not a case whereby the merits were heard. It's just a question of urgency. So our view as an organization, as well as these groupings that were there, is to emphasize the point to say parties have been preparing. Parties are dealing with a lot. Parties are having to have signatures signed up, and which also brings another complexity because you have other people, because of the POPIA Act, saying they do not feel comfortable signing their ID numbers. Therefore, it's not as easy as, for example, you could say you are going to vote for ATM now, but for you to actually, it's a different story if now I want your ID number to capture into a system, you know. So that is why we're saying, out of these complexities that are there, even though the parties have been preparing, and some of them they are ready, and some of them you find that because of the nature of the workload that is there, they are going to push to try and be ready. However, we need now as political parties to raise concerns, particularly on the time frames, so that we don't have a case whereby we let the IEC shorten the time frames and we do not voice our concerns. And then later on, after the 29th of May, when parties are feeling undone by the elections, only then they speak now. We need to raise issues as they happen, regardless whether we are ready as Party A, but if there's an issue that we think it will impact the nature of the elections, we need to raise those issues. Yeah. That is the spirit in which...
So the IEC is saying this is not done as a measure to disadvantage any political party, but as a measure of creating certainty. Because if Party A and Party B begin to say, well, use the 3 weeks, and the IEC does that, and then Party E and Party F are also going to come and say, no, but we need also more time because you gave that other party. And then that creates uncertainty.
There is, this forum is, there were the two parties that are represented in Parliament that were in that meeting, and the rest they are not. And an invite by General went to as many people, as many parties as possible. Therefore, it is not a case whereby Party A and Party B, let's say ATM and UDM, are saying these are the special requirements that, or special time frames for us as two organizations. But what we are saying is that the timelines or the time frames of the elections must be fair to an extent whereby it accommodates everyone. So we're not asking rules for certain parties. We're asking rules that will benefit each and every contestant in the election, so that you don't have contestants that are disadvantaged by short turnaround time, a short turnaround time which is coupled by additional requirements that is imposed on parties. Yeah. So that is why, in our view, we are saying that the IEC, because the IEC has been writing letters to leaders of political parties wanting to meet political parties as individuals. We're saying now that instead of meeting ATM alone or meeting UDM alone, meet with the collective of all parties, regardless whether a party was in the meeting or was not in the meeting. But if they've got any concerns regarding the timetable or any of these requirements, let there be a meeting whereby those issues could be voiced out and then the IEC could create certainty by dealing with those issues, then we move on.
Yeah. So in that particular instance, what then would be the fairness on individuals who have met that requirement? Independents who needed 1,000 signatures, they've got their 1,000 signatures as we speak. They're not raising an objection. Would there be fairness there?
Yeah, definitely it would be fair, because if injustice is not a case whereby you feel undone as an individual, but if the system that affects everyone, there are some people that feel undone. It should be, a person should not be saying that because they managed to comply, they are fine, and they do not have issues because maybe they've got the resources, they've got the infrastructure. But there could be another candidate that does not have the resources and the infrastructure. So if there's any part of the electoral process for these elections that is unjust, that person, if they are actually fighting for free and fair elections, they must not only voice out concerns when they are personally affected, but keep quiet when another person is negatively affected. We want to create a culture whereby an injustice, if one person is feeling an injustice, and when we look at the reasoning, we feel that, okay, indeed this person has been undone, we need to call it out whether you are personally affected, because we want to have a democracy whereby it is the will of the people that reigns supreme. And some of these requirements, to a certain extent, one could feel that the IEC or the manner in which even the political parties in parliament that are deciding on some of these laws are basically choosing to the people, but these are the parties you can choose to actually be in parliament or to actually lead the country. So that is why, Tina, of the view, an injury to one is an injury to all. Let us face injustice regardless whether you are personally affected or you are not personally affected.
Yeah. Other people will look at ATM and say, well, I mean, the ATM, we've seen you giving messages of support to the EFF. We think you're somewhat aligned. We know you're in the multi-party charter for South Africa. Which party are you really looking to?
No, we're not.
Or at least in some coalitions with them in other municipalities and areas.
We are not in any charter as an organization. ATM is contesting elections. We are ready. The deposit is ready. The structures, all of our election processes are ready. Now, we are not in coalition with anyone, but what we are saying as a party now, we are saying that we need to have a new culture of politics whereby we work together. The fact that one person is wearing a yellow T-shirt or blue T-shirt, for us that is neither here nor there, because all of us as parties, we say that we want what is best for the people of our country. So we need to have good relations, particularly given the high political killings rate in our country. So if we as a party are able to teach our citizens that politics should not be about violence, should not be about us because we are sharing different views on what should be done, that should translate into violence. Yeah. Because we see that, I think in the last week, there was some political violence in one of the VDs whereby one gazebo was actually destroyed. So that is why we're trying to create a new culture. That is why when we are invited to some of the rallies of other parties, we will actually honor the invitations. Because also us, when we had our own 5th year anniversary in Gqeberha last year, many parties showed up. So that is the kind of politics that we are wanting South Africans to have. A politics that are centered on issues, not politics that are centered on personalities that divide the country. But let us have politics whereby we are saying, we agree on this issue of the unfairness of the election timetable. So whether we are in a coalition or we are not seeing eye to eye on issues, but let's work together to deal with this issue. We agree on the question of land expropriation without compensation. Let's work together to deal with that. We agree on ensuring that there's effective border management policies in our country so that there's legal movement of people. Let's ensure that we work together to deal with that. So that is why you find that we are not anti-no one. We are pro the people of our country.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming in. Leader of ATM there, Vuyo Zungula.